this is where we learn to make a good mystery great. And today I want to talk about your mystery's hidden villain. First, I want to thank my supporters at Patreon. They help keep these videos going and support my writing, and I want to thank them very much. And if you would like to support this series, you can find the link to Patreon in the description below. Okay, your mystery's hidden villain. It's one of the major challenges for mystery writers. Most stories, the villain, the antagonist is there. We know who they are. We see them in action. And for mystery writers, keeping that villain hidden until your detective discovers who they are is part of the great puzzle of your mystery. And so it feels really challenging. So the first thing that I want to say about your villain is you're going to need to control where and when you drop those hints, those clues about who the villain is in your story. And you need to do that by creating a really deep character background. You need to know as much about your villain as you do about your protagonist, your detective. What that does is it allows you to pick and choose from all the things that you know about your villain. You can choose what to reveal about them and where to reveal that in your story. So think of all your villain's background detail as data collection. That's kind of the way I like to think of it. And then you kind of drip those various pieces of data throughout your story and use them essentially the same way you use other clues in your mystery. Because you do want to keep your villain hidden. And so your villain has to appear in your story. Mystery readers like a reveal because they want to see if they can guess before the detective figures it out. On the other hand, they don't like surprises. So your villain has to be present. They have to be part of your mystery story. You just have to keep the fact that they are the one who committed the murder. You have to keep that fact hidden. So when you're looking at creating the background for your villain, you want to think of their personal life and the personal life in toto, not just what's related to the victim. You want to have a bigger picture of your villain. You definitely want to know the secrets that they want to keep hidden, because the murder probably isn't the only secret. And if you go back to the episodes on secrets and lies for your suspects, you'll get some hints about what to do with those secrets and the lies they tell to cover the secrets. And then if one of those lies is discovered, it's what I call the hidden lies. They have a fallback lie because they really don't want to be discovered. And then you want to know a lot about their life related to the victim. There's a reason that they killed the victim. So you want to know all of that stuff. So focus on that relationship between the villain and the victim. It's the basis for the murder, and for the sleuth's involvement. Without the murderer, there wouldn't be a story, right? So think of the ways the two, the villain and the victim, are connected. Think of the things that went wrong in their relationship. And finally, that one incident that pushed your villain over the edge. Okay, once you have a good solid understanding of your villain, you want to paint a detailed portrait of your villain, and drip those details. But it's kind of hard to figure out, well, when do I drip those details? How do I do it? How do I make it seem like, it's not bright flashing lights going villain, villain, villain. So let's look at some ways you can kind of hide those details that you reveal. So at the end, when your detective reveals the villain, the reader is like, oh, I knew that. So here we go. So let's look at some. One is what I call the secret emphasis. So when you're presenting details, you can emphasize the unimportant, and you can drop something in about the villain, but it's not emphasized. What is around that detail about the villain is what's emphasized in that scene. And the reader sees that little clue about the villain, but they don't see anything important about it, so they don't think about it. For example, your sleuth may see the value of a company report and the statistical details, but doesn't look at the man who researched and wrote that report, and that person was the villain. So just kind of work things in like that. You can also, it's kind of like false foreshadowing. You can drop in a detail before it counts. So early in your story, you can plant a detail about your villain, but when you plant it, it doesn't really have any context, so it doesn't stay in your reader's mind. The sleuth may walk by a man cleaning a yacht with chemicals before business partner dies of toxic chemical poisoning. Carolyn Graham uses this frequently in her Inspector Barnaby series. Another way that you can kind of hide your villain is what I call missed it. In other words, your sleuth and your reader know something about the villain. So say your villain lies to hide a secret, and your detective at that time believes what the villain says. But what the villain has said points to his act even though he lies. So this technique is a great tool to use with a flawed sleuth whose flaws keep him from seeing everything. It's going to depend on your story. You get to pick and choose among all these different devices to keep your villain hidden. Then you can sort of time release piece by piece details about the villain, and you scatter them. You start toward the beginning of the story, and you just kind of scatter these little details throughout your story, and you mix up the logical order. So your sleuth may find an empty letterbox while visiting the villain, and later she finds 6 letters hidden in a closet, and she has an epiphany when she remembers the empty letterbox. So just, when you keep the details separate, it's hard for your reader to remember that happened 100 pages ago. And I know this is true. Okay, I'm not going to divert right now. I will in a minute. Then I call what's in plain sight. When you create a cluster of clues about your villain and maybe some of the other suspects, your detective is reviewing everything that they know so far, and the real clue about that villain is hidden in a list of all the details that your detective is reviewing. So, in other words, it's right there, right in plain sight, but because there's so much other material, there's no reason to focus on that one particular detail. And Agatha Christie uses this technique in Murder on the Orient, and John D. MacDonald uses it frequently in his Travis McGee stories. So it's a very traditional way of hiding your villain. Another way is distraction. So you draw your reader's attention away from the villain. The sleuth and your reader follow that false trail, a suspect who seems like the most evident villain is not the real villain. Adrian McKenty uses this in his great mystery, The Cold, Cold Ground. The clues seem to lead toward a serial killer who targets homosexuals, and it is just not the case at all. So I call that distraction, and that's another good way you can hide your villain. And then another way is to camouflage your villain with action. Just as your sleuth glances at a piece of paper on the floor, he's hit from behind, and in the ensuing action and consequences, he has to go to the hospital, he missed an appointment because he was in the hospital, etc., etc. Your sleuth overlooks the clues that point toward the actual villain. Joe Nesbo uses this a lot in his Harry Hole series. So these are all techniques that established mystery writers use to drop the hints that the villain of who the villain is, and at the same time using these techniques to keep the villain's identity as the villain hidden from the reader. So I think another way to look at it is the more you know, the less you show. So you're going to know a lot about your villain, and at the same time, you're just going to drip these little tiny pieces of information about the villain. And they all add up in your character background, but they're going to be disjointed in your story. So it's going to take a lot of work on the reader's part to put all those clues about the villain together, because remember, they're also sorting through a lot of other clues about a lot of other suspects. So practice using these techniques, hiding your villain from your reader, but also giving them hints along the way. Just one thing that I didn't want to get diverted with earlier, and that is that it's really hard, especially when you start writing mysteries for the first time, because you've done all this background information and built up this big character background, and you know a lot about your villain. And then when you're planting those little clues along the way in your story, to you, it may feel like those flashing lights. But I think if you use these techniques and practice, you'll discover that you're very capable of hiding those clues. They won't be flashing lights to your reader, and at the same time, when you finally reveal the villain, the reader will put all those disjointed pieces of information together and go, oh, it was there all the time. And that's what readers love about mysteries. So please, if you have any questions about this, put them in the comments, because I love talking about writing mysteries and I'm happy to help you. And then right now I am listening to one of my favorite mysteries, Martin Cruz Smith's Gorky Park. I'm listening to that on Audible, and it's really brilliant. If you haven't read Gorky Park, I highly recommend it for anybody who's considering writing mysteries, especially if you're into crime drama. It's really a brilliant work. All right, and then the last thing I wanted to talk about was gathering all that information about your villain. Where do you put it? And I think you've heard me talk about Plotter before, and Plotter has a whole section just for your characters. You can add photos, you can add all the details you want, you can put in any notes, and you can do this not just for your villain and your detective, but for every single character in your story, and they're all in one place. And uh, when you're using Plotter and you're writing your scenes, you can tag the characters in the scene so you know which characters are in which scenes. Plotter's just a great planning tool, so I highly recommend it. I use it myself, and I love it. Um, what it does is, when you get everything all arranged, you get all your background and your research and your character descriptions and all your notes and your setting details, all of that in there. It's easy to refer to it. It's all in one place. Um, and in the end, you can export your outline to Word or to Scrivener. So as you're writing, you can just double check what you have for your notes. All right, so thank you. Have fun hiding your villains. And please subscribe. Click that little notification bell below so you'll get notified the next time there's a new episode of Write a Killer Mystery. Thank you.